Happy birthday, Sonic the Hedgehog. Just like every other 30-something-year-old out there, you're not as cool as you used to be. But today we're going to turn the clock back to a time when Sonic was cool, or at least consistently cool, instead of flip-flopping between cool and lame every other Tuesday. There have been a bunch of different gameplay styles for Sonic over the years, the three most prevalent of them being the classic, adventure, and boost gameplay styles, and of the three, I'm for sure more a fan of the classic Sonic style. Shout out Sammy. I just really like the fun momentum-based 2D platformers. You got the speed, tight platforming, the banger soundtracks, and the culmination of all of these factors, the zones. Our list today is going to feature all 49 zones from Sonic 1, CD, 2, 3 and Knuckles, and Mania. I mean, technically there are 45 zones, but we'll get to that soon enough. So how do we determine if a classic Sonic zone is... Hey, I see you, Sonic Superstars. Look, I've got no beef with you, but I'm just not talking about you today, so scram! Go! Get out of here! So, how do we determine if a classic Sonic zone is good or not? Factor number 1, is it fun? Duh. Is the speed cool? Is the jumping good? Am I running into stupid enemies and spikes all the time? Stuff like that. Factor number 2, how good the vibes be? Is the zone's style, aesthetic, and music good and memorable? And factor number 3, can I replay this zone without getting tired of it? Classic Sonic games are pretty short. Sonic 1, 2, and CD can all easily be beaten in less than an hour if you know what you're doing. Sonic 3 and Knuckles and Mania take 2, maybe 3 hours tops on repeat playthroughs, so replayability is key. Things like secret paths and goodies all throughout the zone are fun ways to achieve this, but fast routes that are fun to learn and get better at speedrunning through are also extremely satisfying. Ideally, a good classic Sonic zone is fun whether you're taking things slow or blazing straight through it. I think you get the point by now, so let's hop right into the list and attempt to get through this relatively fast. I can't think of anything fast right now. Anywho, let's talk about Sonic the Hedgehog. Number 49, Wacky Workbench. This level tries to take the traditional good Sonic level design formula and turn it on its head, and it just fails so miserably at it. A winning formula for classic Sonic levels that we'll be seeing throughout this list is that you have the top path be the fast path. By learning the level layout and platforming well, skilled players are rewarded with the fastest path in the course. If you mess up, you are punished by falling to a lower and slower path. Wacky Workbench tries to flip this design philosophy on its head. The fastest way through the level is this lowest lineup of platforms, but below these platforms is this supercharged floor that will send Sonic soaring up into the sky. Now that you're at the tippy top of the level, you have to work your way back down through this jungle gym-ass level design, then hope that you fall back down onto one of the lower platforms, because if you miss, once again, you're launched straight back up and you have to do it all over again. There's also a very good chance that with any bounce you'll be sent flying into enemies, or spikes, or these bullshit electric things. If you play Wacky Workbench the safe way, all this level turns into is a pretty boring couple minutes of waiting to jump from one platform to another. If you play recklessly, this level turns into a migraine fest as you test your luck against all the bullshit this level sends hurtling your way. No other level works against you and doesn't want you to have fun more than Wacky Workbench. Well, maybe you could argue our other F-tier zone. Number 48, Labyrinth Zone. We all know this is one of the most ass classic Sonic stages. It's slow, the layout is super blocky, which works against Sonic's momentum-based movement, and to put it simply, the level is bullshit. There are loads of hard-to-avoid spikes and unfair enemies. The water makes Sonic's movement super sluggish, and the drowning mechanic is worse here than in any other Sonic water level. Honestly, the Labyrinth Zone probably should be at the bottom of this list. I just wanted to make a statement with Wacky Workbench. Something that I would like to note though, is that if you are playing the Christian Whitehead version of this game, either on iOS, Android, or the Origin Collection, you can enter the debug menu and add the elemental shields to Sonic 1 and 2, and the simple addition of the bubble shield makes Labyrinth Zone infinitely more tolerable. It almost feels like it was designed with the bubble shield in mind. Now, moving on to D tier. Number 47, Mania Angel Island Zone. The only reason this zone is here is because if I didn't include it, somebody in the comments was surely going to actually me. Sonic Mania's Angel Island Zone in the main campaign is literally just a cutscene. In the Encore campaign, however, you do get to play some of the zone, but that lasts all of 20 seconds before freeing Ray and Mighty, and then you get a brief tutorial for the one that you choose. Aside from the zones that are literally just a boss fight, Mania's Angel Island zone is the most bare bones zone that is technically its own zone in the entire classic series. Number 46, Sky Chase Zone. Sky Chase Zone is a slow and boring auto-scroller. The concept is cool, but the execution sucks. This level does not make the boys say hell yeah. Number 45, Collision Chaos. Collision Chaos is an absolute clusterfuck of a level. There's no other way to put it. You see, good Sonic levels will use the springs and bumpers as obstacles that use Sonic's momentum against him. Collision Chaos's one goal is to bounce Sonic all over the place like he's a quarter off an ass. This level is annoying and feels like it was ripped out of a bad Sonic fan game. Number 44, Marble Garden Zone. I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion or not, but Marble Garden Zone is kind of a stinker. The levels are way too drawn out, these speed top things are hard to control, and there's so much hard to avoid unfair BS that would be at home in an endgame zone like Metropolis Zone. But this is only the third zone in Sonic 3, so what gives? I think what really does it for me is that at the end of Act 2, there's a sequence where you have to escape the collapsing ruins, and the screen just shakes violently for 30 seconds straight. When your mom warned you as a kid that video games would ruin your eyes, she was warning you about Marble Garden Zone. Number 43, Scrap Brain Zone, and number 42, Metallic Madness Zone. As I just mentioned, many of the late game zones are prone to unfair BS, and I think that Scrap Brain Zone and Metallic Madness are easily the worst examples of it. I flip-flopped between which of the two I thought was worse for a while. Both levels feature tight platforming, tough enemy placements, blocks that crush, and spikes that spike. Scrap Brain has a lot more hazards like these electrical nodes and these fire geysers, but I think the challenging platforming here is a bit more fun. Metallic Madness has this neat shrinking mechanic, and while Act 1 isn't that bad, Act 2 and 3 can be kind of a nightmare. Oh, but then I remembered the deciding factor here. Scrap Brain Zone is worse because Act 3 is the revenge of Labyrinth Zone. If you don't take the shortcut that falls under the platform at the start of the stage, Act 3 is a living hell. Number 41, Tidal Tempest. Tidal Tempest is Sonic CD's take on Labyrinth Zone, and while it is marginally better than the first game's water level, that still doesn't mean that it's very good. And our last zone of the D tier is number 40, Marble Zone. If I'm being real here, I don't dislike Marble Zone, it's just not a very good Sonic level. The zone is slow, blocky, sometimes unfair. For the most part, the platforming is fine, but it just has level design that doesn't mesh with Sonic's momentum-based gameplay. As I mentioned with Labyrinth Zone, the addition of the spin dash and elemental shields makes this zone far more bearable and borderline enjoyable. C tier, baby! Number 39, Oil Ocean Zone. Honestly, I think I'm a bit more okay with this zone than most people seem to be, but yeah, the enemies can be annoying, and it sucks when you miss these platforms and get spiked, burned, and often crushed. The color palette, aesthetic, and music aren't super appealing. It can also be a drag waiting for these slow platforms, fans, and cannons. Man, am I sure I'm fine with this stage? On a first playthrough, this level can be a pain, but on repeat playthroughs, Oil Ocean isn't that bad to get through. Number 38, Metropolis Zone. Metropolis Zone has a lot of the same problems as the other late game zones that we've already talked about. It's inevitable that at some point in one of these 3 acts, this is the only Sonic 2 zone with 3 acts by the way, that you are going to be spiked, you are going to be crushed, you are going to be attacked. In fact, the enemies and obstacles in Metropolis Zone might be even more unfair than in Scrap Brain and Metallic Madness, but Metropolis Zone has a satisfying sense of speed, and the music is a vibe, so it's better. Number 37, Sandopolis Zone. Sandopolis is arguably the most forgettable zone in the classic Sonic series. Act 1 is fine, I kinda like it, but Act 2 drags on a bit too long and can be a maze to get through. The escape near the end of Act 2 is maybe a little tighter than it should be, but there are satisfying speed sections throughout, so I think it all balances out. Number 36, Launch Base Zone. Launch Base has a bit of an identity crisis going on. It needs to function as both the final act of Sonic 3 and the halfway point of Sonic 3 and Knuckles. What we're left with is a zone that is a bit too easy for an endgame zone and a bit too challenging for a mid-game zone. Most of it is decently fun though, especially once you get used to this zone's mechanics and familiarize yourself with its layout. Oh, and I hope you enjoyed that 40-second long unskippable cutscene of the death egg taking off the first time, because if you die in the boss, you'll have to sit through it again, and again, and again. Number 35, Sonic 2's Hidden Palace Zone. Ah yes, Hidden Palace Zone. If you didn't know, this is the mysterious zone that was cut at the very last second from the original release of Sonic 2, which was finally finished nearly 20 years later when Christian Whitehead was tasked with porting the game. By falling down the infamous inescapable death pit from the original Mystic Cave Zone Act 2, Sonic will fall all the way down to the Hidden Palace Zone, or at least Sonic 2's version of it. And the level is quite good. It's a fun level with great speed, neat gimmicks, and a passable underwater section. The biggest thing against this zone is that there's only one act of it. Speaking of which, number 34, Wing Fortress Zone. Similar to Sonic 2's Hidden Palace Zone, Wing Fortress is a very solid zone with the downside of only having one act to it. In my mind, I always viewed Sky Chase as Act 1 and then Wing Fortress as Act 2, but for the sake of this list, it's good for Wing Fortress that the two aren't a true package deal. Wing Fortress offers good speed and tight and tricky platforming as the game's final level. Mom, can we get Green Hill Zone, please? No, sweetie, we have Green Hill Zone at home. The Green Hill Zone at home. Number 33, Palm Tree Panic. Palm Tree Panic isn't even that bad. As the first level of Sonic CD, it's the most tame and by the books of the bunch. It does an okay job introducing the time travel mechanic of Sonic CD, even if just like the rest of the levels, it horribly breaks up the pacing of the zone. But at the end of the day, Palm Tree Panic is a pretty inoffensive trio of levels, except for this stupid rock at the end of Act 2. Just why? Who hurt you? Number 32, Mystic Cave Zone. Mystic Cave is a pretty solid zone, especially now that they replaced the aforementioned inescapable death pit with an entirely new zone. This level has some tricks up its sleeve, like these snake enemies and these sneaky spike blocks, but that kinda just goes with the level's whole vibe. Mystic Cave is mostly fine from a platforming standpoint, but there aren't really any speed sections to reward good gameplay. Number 31, Spring Yard Zone. Spring Yard is a solid Sonic 1 zone. It has an okay sense of speed and good utilization of Sonic's momentum. The biggest blunder of this level is definitely these vertical crushing block sections. It would be okay if they only appeared once or twice, but oh my god, they are an integral part of this zone's identity, showing up at least 10 times. Number 30, Hilltop Zone. Hilltop is a perfectly fine zone. Okay speed, okay platforming. This is the first zone to do the shaky screen escape sequence, and it's better here than in most of the ones we see in Sonic 3 in my opinion. Yeah, Hilltop Zone is just fine. Before we move on with the rest of the ranking and to the beats here, I think we should tackle the 5 zones that I have decided to omit from the main ranking. These are the 5 boss zones. These aren't really levels, more so set pieces for boss fights and or story progression. Number 5, the Final Zone. The final boss zone of Sonic 1 definitely has the least going for it. You go into it with 0 rings, making any hit a one-hit KO, but the crushing pistons and energy balls aren't that difficult to avoid, especially in versions of the game with the spin dash. It's a serviceable final boss for the first game, but we could only really go up from here. Number 4, Sonic 2's Death Egg Zone. Similar to the final boss of Sonic 1, Sonic enters the Death Egg with 0 rings. First you have to fight Mecha Sonic, who is decently tough, but once you learn to avoid the quills on its back and aim your hits for the front of the robot's head, the fight is fairly quick and satisfying to get through. Then Sonic chases Robotnik down a hall, leading him to... oh god, the Death Egg Robots. Yeah, this boss can be an absolute nightmare your first couple dozen attempts at it. This boss is awful because it moves painfully slow and you have to execute 12 near perfectly timed hits in a row. Miss any of them and you die and you have to start all the way back with Mecha Sonic. Even though Sonic 2's Death Egg can be agonizing, it is still a very impactful final boss zone. Number 3, Sonic 3's Hidden Palace Zone. Okay, this is where stuff starts getting really good. The confrontation with Knuckles is a pretty simple fight, but oh my gosh, what a cool moment. Then Eggman steals the Master Emerald, Knuckles realizes that he's been mistaken this whole time, and he escorts Sonic and Tails to Sky Sanctuary Zone. In terms of telling a story so succinctly and eloquently, no zone does it better than Hidden Palace. Number 2, Egg Reverie Zone. The Egg Reverie Zone is the final showdown between Sonic, Eggman, and the Heavy King over the Phantom Ruby. The fight consists of Super Sonic flying around the stage, collecting rings, and exchanging blows between the enemies. Story-wise, Egg Reverie doesn't quite compare to the two Sonic 3 zones in this category, mainly because Sonic Mania doesn't have a super fluent story, meanwhile Sonic 3 is one of the best examples of dialogue-less 2D action game storytelling ever done. But gameplay-wise, Egg Reverie is a blast that falls right between those two zones. That of course leaves us with the climax of Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Number 1, the Doomsday Zone. After taking down Eggman on the Death Egg, the Doctor makes one final escape attempt with the Master Emerald. Sonic transforms into Hypersonic and rockets through space to stop him. The Doomsday Zone is just so badass, dude. Flying through space, dodging meteors and missiles, collecting rings to stay powered up, the frantic music as you near the end of the chase, running low on rings, getting those last few blows in on Dr. Robotnik before he goes down. And you save the day. Dude, what a final boss. Alrighty, with the boss zone list out of the way, let's hop right back into our main ranking with the B tier zones. Number 29, Mania Oil Ocean Zone. Kicking off B tier, we have the first real zone from Sonic Mania. Oil Ocean getting the Mania treatment couldn't fully cover up the problems from the original zone, but it has certainly come a long way. The addition of the fire shield being able to interact with the environment, and having to clear out the black smoke rising, shout out Greta Van Fleet, are creative enough additions that make Oil Ocean's return a surprisingly enjoyable one. Number 28, Flying Battery Zone. The original Flying Battery has a bangin' theme and is a terrific concept for a level. Act 1 is really good, but Act 2 drags a bit with all the waiting. Like, what is the point of these elevator piston things? Did they want to give the player a 10-second water break? 10 times throughout the level? Number 27, 26, and 25, Mania Metallic Madness, Sonic 3's Death Egg, and Titanic Monarch Zone. All three of these zones are on par with each other in my mind. They all serve the same role of being good and fun, but challenging, but rarely unfair endgame zones. Each of these zones has a list of some pros and some cons that made it tricky for me to determine how to order them. Mania's Metallic Madness has the foreground and background gimmick in Act 1, and the shrinking gimmick in Act 2. Both of these mechanics are really cool, but Act 2 does bring back these flipping shader things from the original, and they kinda hurt my old man eyes. It's not as bad as it is in the original, but it's still there. Death Egg's gravity gimmick can vary from being extremely cool to obnoxious. The part where you're sealed off in that room from Act 2 comes to mind. You bounce around, and because you don't have enough visibility, you just have to pray that you hit all of the buttons in the central console, and then the level is kind enough to let you leave. Also, I think it's interesting to note that this is the only zone without any Knuckles routes. I mean, mainly because Knuckles' story ends at Sky Sanctuary, but one of the biggest strengths of Sonic 3 and Knuckles' zones across the board is that they all contain Knuckles exclusive paths. Sometimes it's a little shortcut that quickly reconvenes with the Sonic path, and sometimes it's pretty much an entirely new level. This isn't really anything against Death Egg, I just think it's interesting. Of Sonic Mania's 4 original zones, Titanic Monarch is by far the least original. It's pretty much a best-of compilation of all the gimmicks and mechanics from all the previous games' final zones. Sure, all of the other new zones in Sonic Mania borrow mechanics from older zones, but they update them in a way that makes them fit the new zone's identity. Titanic Monarch is just the final zone. Also, if there was ever a zone where it was fair to complain about it being too long, Titanic Monarch would be that zone. I'm pretty experienced with Sonic Mania, but Titanic Monarch Act 2 can still take me upwards of 7 minutes just to reach the boss. I know I just did a lot of complaining for 3 zones that I'm claiming to like, but Metallic Madness Mania, Death Egg 3, and Titanic Monarch are how to do an endgame Sonic zone right. Number 24, Carnival Night Zone. Carnival Night is a pretty fun zone. It's got some awesome speed sections and creative platforming bits. The main thing holding it back though is, you guessed it, the barrel. Possibly one of the most unintuitive mechanics in any video game ever. The rest of the zone is pretty alright though. Number 23, Aquatic Ruin Zone. Aquatic Ruin is a surprisingly solid water level. One of the main factors in that being that it's entirely possible to play through this zone without going in the water. I don't know if there's a better example out there of top path fast, bottom path slow level design. Practiced players will be able to take the upper path and clear the zone without much problem, and if you happen to fall down to the slower underwater path, it isn't even that bad. There are 2 things keeping this zone back though. One, this zone is pretty short. The first 4 zones in Sonic 2 follow a formula of having the first act as an introduction to the level's themes and mechanics that can be sped through pretty quickly. The Act 1s usually take no more than 30 seconds to a minute for most skilled players. Then Act 2 is the longer zone that puts the player's skills to the test. Simply put, Aquatic Ruin is a good zone, but a short one. Oh, then the second thing keeping this zone back is that the enemies can be quite a bit bullshit. Like, come on. Number 22, Sky Sanctuary Zone. Rounding out B tier is our final single act zone of the list. Sky Sanctuary might only be a single act, but it is a darn good one, featuring excellent platforming and 3 boss fights. Super Mario Bros. Z, anyone? Boom! A tier time! Number 21, Mushroom Hill Zone. Mushroom Hill has a similar identity problem to Launch Base, where it needs to function as both the first zone of Sonic and Knuckles and the halfway point of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, but Mushroom Hill isn't nearly as bad. It's definitely more difficult than most first zones, but it isn't too bad. It offers enough fun mechanics and speed to be a good time. Not this pulley lever thingy though. This level would be a whole 5 slots higher on this list if this stupid pulley lever thingy wasn't here. Mom, can we get Green Hill Zone, please? No, sweetie, we have Green Hill Zone at home. But Mom, oh wait, this actually isn't that bad. Number 20, Emerald Hill Zone. Emerald Hill is a great zone, the definition of short but sweet. Emerald Hill has upped the speed significantly, but cut back on the multiple paths and exploration that made the original truly special. Number 19, Starlight Zone. Starlight is the only other zone in Sonic 1 that I think is remotely on par with Green Hill Zone. The speed is fantastic, the platforming is solid, and while there is a definite step up in difficulty, the exploding egg robots are particularly annoying, Starlight Zone is still a great zone that knows what Sonic is all about. Number 18, Lava Reef Zone. I am a Lava Reef Zone defender. One big complaint I have with some classic Sonic levels is when they just stop you for no reason. A perfect example of this is that stupid rock hidden at the end of Palm Tree Panic Act 2. Again, who hurt you? Lava Reef is one of the rare levels to master stop-and-go Sonic gameplay. You are stopped, and thanks to these exploding rock enemies, immediately put into a dangerous situation. You aren't just running into something that you can't see coming. You have a few moments to process the danger and act quickly to get past. Genuinely, some of the most fair Sonic level design in the classic series, while still rewarding you with some satisfying speed sections. Number 17, Quartz Quadrant. In all honesty, Quartz Quadrant isn't that good. I just really like it. I think it looks pretty, and the soundtrack is an absolute banger. At one point, I even considered making it my ending theme, but then monkeys. So, the level itself is definitely better than most of Sonic CD's levels. I'd say either Palm Tree Panic or Quartz Quadrant are the main 2 I'd argue for being the second best zone in Sonic CD. Not the best because that one is obvious, and we'll get to that in a minute. Realistically, Quartz Quadrant deserves to be around the high 20s to low 30s, but I just like it. If there was ever a reason I would be begging for a Sonic Mania 2, it would be so that this zone could get a shot at redemption. Mom, can we get Green Hill Zone, please? No, sweetie. We have Green Hill Zone at home. But Mom, wait, this is actually amazing. And on fire! Number 16, Angel Island Zone. Angel Island is a fantastic opening zone. It offers tremendous speed, loads of exploration, and a great Knuckles path. Just everything you need to get a player into the groove of things. My one critique of Angel Island is that for a first zone boss, the Act 2 boss is not very easy. Meaning that once again, I hope you enjoy 40-second long unskippable cutscenes because new players are going to become very familiar with this one. Number 15, Casino Night Zone. Casino Night Zone is an iconic level with stupendous vibes. It introduced the simple but genius idea of using Sonic's ball and momentum-based movements to treat him as a pinball. The level can be a bit slow with the elevators and slow-moving blocks, but I can look past this as a part of the casino vibe. Number 14, Press Garden Zone. Press Garden is easily Sonic Mania's most unique zone, as it takes us backwards through the printing press process. In Act 1, we go through the factory with the crushing presses and bouncing paper belts. Then in Act 2, we emerge into a frozen cherry blossom forest where the trees are shredded to be turned into the paper we see in Act 1. Act 1 is quite good, but Act 2 is where this zone shines, with absolutely gorgeous music and visuals. Number 13, Stardust Speedway. Like I said, I don't know if anyone could argue that Stardust Speedway isn't the shining star of Sonic CD. This level is just a massive playground for Sonic to speed through. Add on the awesome race against Metal Sonic in Act 3, and we've got a stellar zone that makes playing through the rest of Sonic CD worth it. Number 12, Mirage Saloon Zone. I was a bit conflicted for a while as to how to rate Mirage Saloon. Act 1 is a homage to Sky Chase Zone, and while it is an improvement, it's still quite easily the worst individual act in Sonic Mania. But then you go to Act 2, which I consider to be one of the very best acts in Sonic Mania. Mirage Saloon Act 2 is one of my favorite levels to try to speedrun through. So I wasn't sure how to weigh the superb Act 2 against the subpar Act 1, but then I remembered that's only half of Mirage Saloon Zone. Playing through Sonic Mania as Knuckles can be a bit underwhelming. There just isn't as much going on for him compared to Sonic 3 and Knuckles' campaign for the Echidna, which with how many exclusive paths there are for him, is more or less an entirely new game. But then you reach Mirage Saloon Zone Act 1. I think Knuckles' escape from the canyon in Mirage Saloon is one of the best Knuckles levels in the entire classic series. Then you play through Encore mode, and that Act 1 is entirely new yet again. This time the escape from the canyon is designed with all 5 playable characters in mind. You've got secrets and hidden paths for Knuckles and Mighty, shortcuts and hidden goodies for Tails and Ray, and awesome speed sections for Sonic. I mean, they can all go fast, but come on, let Sonic have this one. So now the argument is between 3 spectacular acts and 1 mediocre one. And I think the top of A tier is a fair place for Mirage Saloon. Alright, let's wrap things up with the best that classic Sonic has to offer. Welcome to the S tier. Number 11, Mania Lava Reef Zone. Once again, I am a defender of Lava Reef Zone. And Mania's interpretation undoubtedly elevates the original with even more speed sections and tighter level design. Also, most levels in Sonic Mania don't have significant Knuckles content. Mirage Saloon was the first exception, and Lava Reef is the other. Here there's a great Knuckles path that leads to an exclusive fight against the Heavy King. Also, they brought back the conveyor belts from Quartz Quadrant, and that makes me smile. Mom, can we get Green Hill Zone, please? Fine. Yippee! Number 10, Green Hill Zone. The Sonic the Hedgehog level. Green Hill Zone has iconic visuals and music. If you want to, you can speed through each act in 20 seconds, but there's enough great platforming and exploration here to where if you want to slow down and explore the zone for minutes, you can. It is genuinely a single stage so good that it launched an entire franchise. Number 9, Mania Stardust Speedway. Sonic Mania's Stardust Speedway brings back all the exciting breakneck speed of the original, but refines the level a whole lot. One of the most significant changes being the removal of the time travel post from the original, which as mentioned before, butchers the entire pacing of Sonic CD. Now in Mania, Act 1 is the past version, and Act 2 is the present version of the zone. Also, the boss fight in Act 2 is a hybrid between the original Stardust Speedway race and the final boss of Sonic 3, and that's awesome. Number 8, Mania Flying Battery Zone. Sonic Mania brings back the flying battery in tremendous fashion. The most significant upgrades are in Act 2. Instead of playing the waiting game for half the level like you do in the original, Mania's Flying Battery Act 2 makes you feel like an absolute badass. Add on the new electric shield magnetism and greatly improved propeller mechanics, and you have a phenomenal reimagining of a classic. To somebody unfamiliar, it may be a surprise to see a water level this high up on the list, but number 7, Hydro City, and number 6, Mania Hydrocity are just that good. We've come a long way from the sluggish and blocky Labyrinth Zone. Hydro City is like a roller coaster and a tsunami had a baby, and that baby had an absolutely banging soundtrack. Hydrocity is a fantastic zone. And yes, I did make a point to pronounce it both ways because I don't want people to get mad at me. Number 5, Chemical Plant Zone, and number 4, Ice Cap Zone. Something that you might be noticing with the zones in S tier is that they go above and beyond when it comes to the vibe factor of this list. Because Sonic 2's Chemical Plant and Sonic 3's Ice Cap are mwah, chef's kiss. From a level design standpoint, both of these zones are still great, but the vibes are what make these zones as beloved as they are. Racing through the loops and escaping the iconic purple water in Chemical Plant, shredding down the hill at the start of Ice Cap Zone, and my god, the music. The music! If either of these zones weren't accompanied by some of the best music in the entire franchise, they'd probably be a whole 10 spots lower on this list. Case in point, Ice Cap Zone and Sonic Origins. The replacement beta song isn't even that bad, but the chilling, isolating song from the original is what makes Ice Cap Zone as legendary as it is. Number 3, Mania Green Hill Zone. We just sang all the praises to Green Hill Zone a few minutes ago, and Sonic Mania's first level is Green Hill Zone again, but much better. It offers greater speed, more to explore, and fun new mechanics like the zip lines and the flame shield burning down the wooden bridges. We have a great new Knuckles path, and the fight against the upgraded Death Egg robot is an exhilarating way to kick off Sonic Mania. Nostalgia aside, if anyone looks me in the eyes and says that Sonic 1's Green Hill Zone is genuinely better than Mania's, they're lying. This is Green Hill Zone perfected. Now, maybe Sega will finally start recycling it already. Number 2, Mania Chemical Plant Zone. Take all of the elements that make Chemical Plant Zone a phenomenal zone that we just talked about, the speed, the music, the vibes, and now infuse all of that with genuinely spectacular level design. Mania Chemical Plant and the zone that we're about to talk about next are maybe the best 2 examples of going from fun and fluid high-speed platforming to rewarding the player with a rush of dopamine and exhilarating speed sections. Act 1 is pretty much the original zone's 2 acts sandwiched together, so that's fun, fast, and awesome. Then Act 2 is wholly original, focusing on these bouncing jellies. These freaky little freaks really took the gimmick from Wacky Workbench, the worst gimmick in classic Sonic level history, and turned it into an exciting and creative mechanic that works perfectly with the level's direction. Not to mention, Mean Bean Machine? I swear, the Mania team is a bunch of geniuses. Case in point, their masterpiece. Number 1, Studiopolis Zone. Dude, I don't even know where to begin with Studiopolis. You've got 2 near-perfect levels with some of the best music in any video game ever. It cannot be understated how much T-Lopes cooked with the Mania soundtrack. But lights, camera, action, and primetime are the definite standouts here. Gosh, the style, the speed, the plethora of references, the music, everything about Studiopolis is about as perfect as classic Sonic has ever been. So you made it to the end of the list. Congratulations. Now it is time for the first of many, the super secret bonus list at the end of the video. Today's super secret bonus list is ranking the 5 classic Sonic games from worst to best, based entirely on the math of this list. It's pretty simple. I just took the average score of each game's zones to determine which game on average had the best levels. Coming in at 5th, not too much of a surprise, it's Sonic CD. Sonic CD features 1 really good level, another zone that is honestly only so high on this list because I'm biased, 1 pretty good zone, and 4 of the worst zones in the series. Coming in at 4th place is the original Sonic the Hedgehog. This game follows a very similar pattern as CD. There are 2 really good levels, 1 quite good level, and 3 stinkers. The main reason Sonic 1 pulled ahead here is simply because mathematically, 4 stinkers weigh your average score down more than 3 does. I still really like both of these games, but nobody can say that they are not without their problems. Taking our middle spot on this list is Sonic 2. In general, Sonic games tend to have better zones in the first half of the game. I mean, look at Sonic Mania, the top 3 zones on this list are the first 3 zones of that game. But Sonic 2 is an extreme example of this. The first 4 zones of Sonic 2 are really good, with the big thing against them being that they're kinda short. Then the middle zones are okay, with the final few zones being kinda rough. Still though, Sonic 2 is undeniably a major step up from Sonic 1 and CD, but it can't quite keep up with the gold standards of the series that are Sonic 3 and Knuckles and Sonic Mania. Based off of our scores, our second place game is Sonic 3 and Knuckles, with an average score of 23.6. Meaning that our best classic Sonic game, based off of the math of this zone ranking list, by a landslide is Sonic Mania, with an average placement of 14.9. And that is also including the barely qualifying Angel Island zone. If you drop that, then the average score of Sonic Mania's 12 zones is an incredible 12.25th place. 12.225, you get what I'm trying to say. That's a good number. If you have been paying attention at all, this should not be a surprise one bit. I mean, 9 out of the top 15 zones on this list were from Sonic Mania. The lowest ranking zone on this list, excluding Angel Island Zone, was Oil Ocean, which is still a solid B- tier zone. The creativity and level of design on display across the entire game is just out of this world. But that's where this conversation gets interesting. How creative is Sonic Mania really? Something that I wasn't necessarily taking into account in the making of this list was zone originality. Both Sonic 3 and Knuckles and Sonic Mania consist of 12 main zones each. Only 4 of Sonic Mania's 12 zones are original, and these new zones and the revamping done to the 8 returning zones borrow mechanics, themes, and ideas from older titles. Meanwhile, Sonic 3 and Knuckles features 12 brand new zones. Sure, not all 12 of those zones are winners, but making 12 great zones from scratch is a much more daunting task. Not to mention, Sonic 3 and Knuckles did all of this nearly 25 years before Sonic Mania. Sonic 3 and Knuckles was revolutionary. Sonic Mania took what the original did and refined it with the design conventions that are far more standard in our modern gaming landscape. I would still say that Sonic Mania is the better game. It's certainly my favorite of the classic series, but I completely understand where the diehard Sonic 3 and Knuckles fans are coming from. So, there's my finalized list. Is it perfect? Yeah.